The purpose of this tutorial is to give you some exposure to the TWS Section 7, the reflection and self-evaluation portion of the entire teacher work sample. This particular section is not a long one. It's not incredibly difficult to write, but I will say that it can help you in an interview process, and it can help you as you establish goals for your first year of teaching, which you'll be required to do in almost all school districts as part of your long-term staff development plan. So what I want to do is just focus on the structure. So in this particular section, what you are going to do is review the strengths that you saw kind of develop in your unit. Now these could be the strengths in your lesson planning, in your classroom management style, student achievement as a result of something you did, maybe innovative assessments. What we tend to see from sequence 3 is that folks will focus on just one strength and one weakness. And as we mentioned in our very first student teaching seminar, this particular TWS, written during student teaching, is kind of the pinnacle of all TWSs. So it's the full project. And in your previous TWS experiences, they maybe pared it down a little bit for you to scaffold your experience. So now you're in student teaching and we're asking for the entire thing. And that means that you're going to give us more than just one strength and more than just one weakness. So again, just to review, you begin section 7 with a discussion of the strengths that you saw in your unit. And you want to make sure that you maybe reference some of that data that you collected in section 6 to support this conclusion that you've drawn. The way that we've described it previously was kind of in thinking in terms of a doctor. If you have an illness or symptoms, you go to a doctor, you tell them what's going on, and they say, I think you have got this, X, Y, and Z, whatever that outcome is. Might be some disease or arthritis, whatever. And section 6 is really all about that. When you get to 7, you're going to highlight those strengths, those symptoms that you saw that really tell us what you've got, a quality teaching experience. But it is also then when you move into weaknesses and you make a prescription of how to get better. And that's really what 7 is a focus for, is helping you to hone in on that prescription element. So just to reiterate, you're beginning with a review of strengths, and it is a review because you're going to kind of pull on information from section 3, but you're going to highlight just, maybe 2 or 3 major strengths that came out of the unit, telling us why. You will make sure that you don't just limit it to your high and low achieving objective. Again, that you're really looking at your unit holistically. The second thing you're going to do is address your weaknesses. This basically should be a direct result of what you presented in section 6. So in 6, you automatically were able to identify where maybe you had lower achieving objectives, or you should have been able to tell even from section 5 if you had classroom management issues. Literally, after you identify your strengths, you're going to methodically list every weakness that you identified. I would not do more than 3. And as you address and kind of introduce to your reader the weaknesses that you saw, then you give the prescription for how you plan to make it better the next time you were to ever teach a lesson or unit rather like this. Be sure that when you talk about that weakness and then you give a prescription, that you directly follow up that conversation with kind of a justification as to why this prescription for improvement is actually going to give you better results for your students. So for instance, if I have a classroom management issue that I think was causing low performance on an objective on one given day, some lesson that I taught in my unit, then I might say, as you can see from this data, this objective was not met by my students. You can kind of share that data. Then what you're going to do after you share that data is you might say something like, in looking at section 5 and the instructional changes I had to make on that day, and obviously you're not going to be using I because you're going to be saying the teacher candidate. So you can say the teacher candidate faced multiple classroom management issues and disruptions. it is believed that those disruptions had a negative impact on student achievement that day. If this lesson were taught again, the following changes would be made to classroom management. The next portion is that justification, is basically how are you going to get better results from that. So then you as a teacher candidate, referring to yourself in the third person, you would then state how that change in classroom management approach is going to get your students to pay attention more. And because they're paying attention, lead to better results. So again, you can talk about instructional strategies that were strengths and weaknesses, but you can also do classroom management, so don't forget about that. After you outline your strengths, giving data to support it, you're highlighting those weaknesses, saying how you would improve them, that's your prescription. You're telling us how that change, how you anticipate that change to give you better results. And then finally, you're going to end the discussion with, in this section, with a discussion of how the TWS experience and process improves your ability to serve diverse student populations. And then secondly, you're going to talk about professional development goals that kind of developed out of this unit and unit analysis. So let's talk about this first one here, a discussion of how the TWS experience improves your ability to teach, basically. Number one, you and I both know that you probably didn't enjoy writing the entire TWS. However, if we're very, very honest, we also know that never again will you get an opportunity to examine your teaching in depth like this, more than likely, unless you go on to national board certification or you have a really unique relicensure experience or something that's done through your employer, kind of forcing you to look at this analysis in depth. So because of that, let's really try to look at the TWS experience and talk about kind of what you learned about yourself as a teacher. How did this make you better? What did you realize once you really started crunching data? Once you started looking at alignment between objectives and assessments and instructions, did you discover that that was a weakness for you? Did you discover the importance of differentiation and why do you think that's important? So please, in this last section, don't blow smoke. Don't give us a bunch of BS about how you loved writing the TWS. I mean, maybe you did, and so I shouldn't say that, but I'm assuming you didn't. So don't just blow smoke and tell us what you think we want to hear. We truly want you to do an honest analysis of your learning, talking about how the TWS experience and process gave you a chance to analyze your teaching and what that did for you then. And then lastly, what you're going to do, you're going to end the entire TWS project with a final section that talks about your professional development goals for the future. The idea would be your professional development goals are based on weaknesses, really, that have come out of the TWS unit or out of your student teaching experience as a whole. Now, these weaknesses, if you will, could also be areas of interest rather than weaknesses. So you could, again, identify weaknesses, but lastly, another option would be perhaps you learn some particular literacy strategy and you really want to see that expanded in your content area. Maybe something with Common Core, maybe next generation science standards, whatever, and then you're kind of highlighting that element. Maybe you learned a new software, some software that's available to music classrooms, and so you've decided that you want to investigate that more and bring it into your classroom to help your students become reflective on their performances. So anything like that, but the bottom line is we want you to list your goals and tell us why you selected those goals. So again, make them meaningful. I would not do more than 3. When you write those goals, I want to go ahead and take you back to when you wrote goals in the general plan. Remember, one of the things that I really emphasized with you when you wrote your general plan is that it needs to be measurable. So don't just say, I want to get better at classroom management. That's too vague and really isn't going to allow you to target efforts and staff development opportunities to get you to a higher performance professionally. And so you really want to make it a targeted, specific goal that is measurable. These goals can be used in an interview process, can be placed in an application, And furthermore, something that when you do get a job, when you have to develop your professional development plan on site, you can use these goals for that as well. So really spend time reflecting on what you want to do to be a better teacher, and then let your goals be reflective of that. So in summary, section 7, you're starting with strengths, giving data to support your conclusions as to what those strengths are. You're then methodically addressing areas of weakness, probably around 3. You're explaining to us why those are weaknesses, what you will do better next time, and how you know that that particular improvement strategy is going to yield better results for you and your students. And then you're going to have a final 2 paragraphs, one that talks about how the TWS experience, protocol, and process has allowed you to improve your skills as a teacher. And then finally, the final paragraph, you're outlining approximately 3 professional development goals in the future, and then tell us how those are based on the TWS and student teaching experiences. As you continue in these final sections of the manual, you'll see tips for success, where they'll kind of ask you a series of questions, maybe to help you kind of process through the idea of did students attain the goals that I laid out. They suggest no more than 2 pages, and usually that's about what section 7 is. And then common challenges are listed as well. And then the rubric is here. So be sure to review the rubric and to use these headings as you go through and build section 7.